So just to introduce Darren Royle from DiffBlue. He's the development lead, AI for coding you're going to discuss. So Darren is a classical full-stack web developer, having implemented and managed huge SaaS applications 15 years within the educational field. Today he leads the integration team within DiffBlue, bringing AI for code to the web and providing seamless integration into developers' workflows and development lifecycles. So there you go.
Thank you very much. I've never heard that read out loud. I might rewrite it instantly. So yeah, I don't need to introduce who I am, so that saves one slide. But yeah, as I said, I'm Darren Royle. I work for an academic startup called DiffBlue, based in Oxford. We've been running for approximately 2 years, and we're trying to automate all programming tasks, which seems like a fairly straightforward thing to do. We've been going, as I say, for about 2 years, and one of the things that I want to show you today is kind of a couple of different things that we're doing, and some of the pitfalls that we've found in trying to bring a service that is as complex as this to market. So firstly, a brief apology. The reason I'm so late and slightly disheveled and, I don't know, a bit freaked out is I was a last-minute replacement for today. So you may notice in notes I'm called Kiki de Bruin. That's not my real name. I'm neither Dutch or female. But yeah, I'm going to fill in today. So this is kind of a bit of a smush of 2 presentations. Pardon me? Friday night. Saturday night I go to Louise, because that's a much funkier name. Are you an AI evangelist? I am not an AI evangelist. I'm a developer, but I can evangelize anyway, because I do recognize the need for AI everywhere. So yeah, as I said, I've kind of smushed to do 2 presentations together because I wasn't too sure on the crowd either. So one's kind of a slightly simplified version of our roughly, what we do, and then the second half is some of the stuff that we've found in trying to bring this product to market, mainly because my specialism is web and product and shipping and support and scaling and all of the nasty problems that come as a result of hosting something like this. So briefly, the company, we've got 2 founders, Daniel on the left and Peter on the right, and they've been working in years and years and years in verification and static analysis. You may have come across Daniel's work in an open source project called CBMC, and it's bounded model checking. But effectively, they came together on a common love for static analysis, which is something only Germans and Austrians will probably get. And they decided that there was a need, a crisis, in fact, brewing in the very core of academia, which was a lack of engineers and a lack of, a greater requirement for software development. So they thought, let's get the transformers involved and create something that will automate as much of the developer's day as we possibly can. We're not very good at inventing programmers, but we can make them more efficient. So the idea is to take all of the niggles of a day-to-day developer's life and automate as much as humanly possible. So the crisis with which we speak is kind of this. This is the forecast up to 2022 in terms of sort of job openings within software engineering and the number of bachelors that are coming out of universities. It's a fairly scary number compared to other subjects. Engineering is a slightly weirder one because there's like a lot more crossover now with computing, but effectively there is a bit of a problem, a bit of a shortfall, which is good for people like me because I can get jobs pretty easily, but it's bad for the industry as a whole because there's not much competition and you get terrible developers like me doing jobs that they probably shouldn't. So just making sure I haven't missed anything. So yeah, so the tools that developers currently have at their disposal even is things like linters, code checkers, things that do kind of automatic refactoring. We'll do code complete in your IDEs. We can do code metrics, so this thing called code smells, which I quite like. We've got bug finder static analysis, which, for the very kind of top end developers, they'll be able to statically analyze their own code and, get some meaningful stuff out of it. But that is only a very small subset of developers that use something like that. Obviously, you've got unit testing, but that isn't an automated process. That's just something automated that helps the developer. It's still a lot of work involved in getting there. We've got debugging, which doesn't do anything for you, just give you an insight into what's going on. And then we've got this magical question mark thing. What can we do that will add to this plethora of tools in a way that isn't kind of, slightly naff? So I like this one. So we do this super technical whizzy thing, and there's probably a lot of people in the room who could explain this better if they knew the inner workings. I see this as a black box. I get the stuff to go in and to come out. But effectively, we do this magical thing where we take code, we derive some sort of semantic understanding of the code. We boil it down into its component parts. It looks a lot like BBC microcode to me. We then pass this over to what we call the theorem prover, which is this magic piece of technology where we can ask it a number of questions against that source code. So things like, what are all of the inputs to get all of the available outputs? For every return statement, generate me some values that will trigger each one of them. How can I make it go in an infinite loop? We can do all sorts of bits and pieces like this. We can ask it questions, and it can give us what we call traces, i.e. steps through the code that we would need to mimic in order to exercise that particular thing that we want. And what we end up with on the other side is some level of output. So we, as our first port of call, always disable your screensavers. So yes, we thought of this output and thought, well, what could we possibly use it for? And Daniel, our CEO, has spent years and years and years doing freelance work with companies like Amazon and Toyota and all sorts of people doing static analysis against hardware models and software models and using the output of those to derive things like unit tests. Ooh. So this is our first product, which we called Deep Test. Did that work? No, Deep Test. And it spits out unit tests that, well, this is one of them. So we had a fairly straightforward example in Java, which has a function called get check tic-tac-toe position. It takes in a board, a representation of a tic-tac-toe board, noughts and crosses, but we have to appeal to the Americans. And it will generate a input into that function and know what the expected output is, which sounds remarkably like a unit test. So what we end up with is a way of synthesizing the current state. So if you imagine this as a 9x9 grid, but in a single line, we've got 1, 2, 0, 2, 1, 1, 0, 2, 1, which in my mind is top left to bottom right. Player 1 has 1. So this is what we expect. And this is now a unit test. We can check this into code. And if anybody breaks this model, cool, we get told off. So this is kind of the core of what we're focusing on right now, but there's also a whole host of other things that we think we can bring out of this same technology. Things like, you know, what are common security flaws that we might find? How do we cause Johnny Trot tables to come along and kill our database? All sorts of bits and pieces like that. So unit tests is a kind of easy win. There's two things that are completely true about unit tests. They're great when they're around, but they're a pain in the bum to make in the first place, a bit like children. And we have picked a quote from Benjamin Price up here, sorry, who did this great talk about how unit tests can save the world. And then I popped my quote on there, which is, I really hate writing unit tests. Incidentally, we've got lots of data to back this up, particularly in startups, particularly in young companies, but even in bigger institutions. The first thing to go when crunch happens, when a deadline is going to be missed, is unit tests. They get jettisoned pretty quickly. It's amazing how many test-driven development companies you find stop calling themselves test-driven development within about 6 months. I'm seeing some smirks, so this sounds familiar, which is good. Now, that's a great thing, right? We've got this thing, we ship it, great, fab, fantastic, except the laptops. Ooh, no, we don't like laptops. So I have 2 boys, so everything is sort of flourished with children's TV. I hope you don't mind. So yeah, we cannot ship our product to a laptop. It does things like this. So this is a reasonably priced Dell XPS laptop. Retails at about $799. If you want to buy one, I can give you a code, and I get my commission. And basically, you can see that I've got Google Chrome running. Sorry, and a number of Docker containers, and it's topping out pretty horribly. So if we add something to a developer's life, we haven't really got much room to work in. And static analysis, particularly what we do, you need, for a big project, you need about 16 gig of RAM, you need a couple of days, and maybe you'll get some results out. But we are obviously optimizing this. So we obviously went through what many vendors of our particular kind of category go through, is let's do it as a SaaS. SaaS is good, SaaS is easy. It saves all of the problems. And I think many, many moons ago, when SaaSes were first kind of gaining traction, this was great. You know, people didn't really mind having a login for another product. They didn't really mind that it didn't quite give them what they want, but they've become much more savvy. They've become much more aware. So a lot of the companies that we're dealing with, a lot of the clients that we have, they're reasonably big. We have a very big bank that we work with, and they have about 150 different products that their developers use at any one point. And basically what they want to do is just transition everything into one single source of truth. They don't want logins, 150 logins, imagine that, it'd be terrible. The other problem we have with SaaS as well is it has to fit into all of these different modules. So we have things like test-driven development or business-driven development or just agile itself. Like, these sorts of things are not kind of particularly easy in the SaaS land because you have this sort of feedback loop. Like, if you've got something that sits on a developer's laptop and they can get a nice result within a few minutes within their IDE, everything's cool. But as soon as you have to upload this to a SaaS and you have to wait for some results, that feedback loop becomes a bit harder and a bit longer. So, we also have test-driven development as well, which for us is a bit of a killer. I think in my notes I wrote something like, how can we work out what the chicken is without the egg when they just give us the chicken? Which is kind of true. How do we derive unit tests from source code when they haven't written the source code in the first place? They've written unit tests. Well, we are going to introduce another product one day that takes those unit tests and writes the source code. But that's a different problem. But basically what we find is all of these methods, all of these approaches that companies have to create their software really need to be taken into account if you're a vendor of a piece of software that will sit alongside a developer's day-to-day life. And we have, oh God, CI, you know, this whole kind of massive loop of things. Where do you slot your product in on this great, epic tree of life, which happens in every software development team? So I came up, was, you know, compelled because I thought there was a number of people who were likely creating products that do something similar to ours, that as vendors, we really have to be mindful of these facts. Like, we shouldn't be creating logins for users. We shouldn't be actually there. As best as possible, we should boil into the background and make their lives as easy as possible. We tried various approaches. This was a diagram that one of our designers drew up one day and kind of said, does this work? And we showed it to a user and they said, what does that even mean? Who is this person? Why is his name expected? There's all sorts of stuff like this that you need to make it really clear as to what you do. Steal from CI. This is my favorite one, is CI servers are becoming more accepted. They're always hated. Every single software developer I ever speak to hates either Travis, Jenkins, Circle CI, CodeShip, you name it. If it's a CI server, they hate it. But they do ultimately do the job that we want to kind of mimic in many ways. The other one as well is see if you can integrate into SCM. So this is, we're basically doing a two-pronged attack where we want to be able to integrate to most CI and most SCM. And the way of doing this is reasonably straightforward. All of these providers will give you a webhook that says, hey, something's happened, and they'll give you a route back in to say, oh, this is something I want to contribute to that piece of work. I really should replace this now with GitLab, given everybody has jumped ship. But basically, if you can kind of get in on that continuous integration loop, you're onto a bit of a winner, really, certainly in our terms. So generally, some tips if you're a vendor is things like, you know, only reinvent the bits that make you particularly unique and particularly special in your market. For us, it's generating unit tests. That's all we want to do. Where they come from and where they go to, we don't really care. Don't imagine that another login is easy to remember. Developers hate them. Always be aware of the process. So, as I say, we come across lots of different clients. So we come across people who do test-driven development, and they sit there and go, what are you going to do for us? And we have to have an answer for that problem. Always kind of know what your kind of group of people you're looking at, and stick within the constraints of the familiar. Try your very best to stay in the land that they all understand, particularly with things like GitLab, GitHub. If you can contribute towards a PR in an automated way, they love that. They really do. 5 minutes. Okay, I've already got my question slide up. I stormed through that one. Sorry. Any questions? Hello.
Can you go back to the slide with the example test case, please?
Sure.
Okay, so there's an assertion there at the bottom that the return value is supposed to be 1.
Yes.
Where did the 1 come from?
This one?
1, yeah. How did you know the return value was supposed to be 1?
Oh, that's the magic machine. So that's
or the snake oil, if I was being asked.
Sure. So the black box that sits in the middle of all of this is ultimately a what we're doing is we are boiling down the code into this semantic understanding. We get a mathematical model, and we put it through lots of SAT solving to balance out the equation.
That generates a test vector by BNC.
Sure.
How do you know what the correct answer is? You don't.
I think the point is you generate tests to show the system does what it does.
Sure. Yeah.
You are generating tests based on the assertion that the system does what the system does.
Absolutely. And we make no assumption, we make no claim that we do anything else. Sure. Okay. Fab.
But you are basically testing with no specification. The specification.
The specification is the code.
Shouldn't crash, and that's about all I'm getting.
So what we sell and what we do this based on is you're a software engineering house with a lot of legacy code. Your developers walked off into the sunset. They didn't do unit tests. We take that code, we generate unit tests that look like this. They then can implement new functions, new features, knowing that they haven't broken anything that existed previously. Sure. Yeah, and it has massive value. The clients that we're speaking to at the moment have been spending oodles of money retrofitting unit tests. No. Sorry, I hope I didn't claim that we did. Okay. So that's more business driven. So you have this idea of I have this feature, I have this specification for something, whereas as a programmer, I just want to know I've written this function to do whatever within the code. Sure.
What you're doing is saying I've done something that's right. I just want to check that what I've done is right. But you're checking against the thing you've written.
Sure, absolutely.
From faults, you can prove anything you like, and that's what you've proven.
Absolutely. Yes. But I mean, as I say, I don't claim that it's anything other than that. I think what we're finding in people that we speak to, and even myself from my own background, I can tell you that when you have code that isn't yours, the last thing you want to do is touch it because you're so worried. If you haven't got 100% test coverage, it raises test coverage.
Would it be fair to say what you're testing against is unintended changes rather than does the software?
Absolutely. Yeah. We do not prove that the software does the thing that you claimed it to do. We prove that between changes, it will continue to do what it currently does. Does that make that clearer? Yes.
So I can kind of either from a marketing point of view,
sure.
Say SAT solve with SMT code RAI,
mm-hmm.
and you can call. Well, you could say they are, you know, and I mean, constraint programming is called AI. SAT solve is not better than constraint programming. So, but is there different? Is there any other AI go?
Yeah. So we want to save ourselves compute cycles on a lot of the analysis that we do. So we are using machine learning in some of our products to ensure that we're not duplicating effort. So we do try to take into account previous runs. We also do things like sort of coming up with diffs against the code, so we only test changes and things like that. So we have lots of other more complicated things past the SAT solver. Yeah.
In the poll before that, when you showed the system, you said code goes in.
Code goes in, yes.
And then you mentioned Java. Java the only language?
Java at the moment, we can do C, but we're only shipping a product for Java today. Yeah. And there's.
Is it a quick question?
Yeah, I just got. So when you run this on a legacy code base,
sure.
The action is the legacy code base does crash on the front end. So what do you do when you're given a legacy code base that simply isn't complete?
We generate a unit test that prove that it crashes. Like we don't, as I say, we don't do anything to understand what it's trying to do. We write tests that prove exactly what it's doing. So if
Any method, okay, fine.
yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
No problems.
Anyway, thank you for that, Darren. Very good.